Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the League of Oregon Cities 99th Annual Conference here in the beautiful, amazing city of Bend. Presenting the colors today are officers from the Bend Police Department's Honor Guard. Would you all please stand? Performing our national anthem this afternoon are the Bend High Dynamics.
So proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
The Bend High Dynamics are the elite vocal ensemble from Bend Senior High School. They often perform jazz, funk, and pop music, but can be found singing traditional Christmas carols all over town in December. This long-running ensemble has performed at festivals and events throughout the Northwest and challenged students for decades. And now, please welcome the president of the League of Oregon Cities from the city of Hermiston, the Honorable Mayor Dave Drotzman.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. I love this association. It's such a great association to be a part of, and thank you for participating. Welcome to Bend and our 99th annual conference. Can you believe we're almost 100 years old? Such a great association to be a part of. Let's give another round of applause to the Bend Police Honor Guard and the Bend High Dynamics. Always great to have youth participating in our association. We're trying to engage them more and more in city politics because we're building the cities for their future, and they should have a say in that. So it's nice to have them engaged and involved. I am Mayor Dave Drotzman from Hermiston. It's been my honor serving as your president this last year, along some amazing colleagues on the board of directors and a talented staff at the League of Oregon Cities office. Let's have the board of directors please stand and be recognized. If you would do me a favor, and if you see them in the halls or in their classes this week, please thank them. They're doing extra work and effort to make their cities, your cities, and our state a better place to live. So please pat them on the back, thank them. And you know what? We're a fun organization to be a part of. And so we would love to have you join us and be a part of that association as well. Now let's have the staff stand and be recognized, led by our executive director, Patty Mulvihill. So they're all wearing names on their shirts this week. They are the names of the cities, of the board members. Please pat them on the back as well. This organization doesn't function without them. And if you have any questions, words of support, or recommendations, please seek them out. They're here to help and make your conference the best it can be. As a board, we pride ourselves in working with and for you to solve the challenges facing your cities every day. If we aren't living up to that responsibility, please seek one of us out and let us know how we can support your city better. As your president this last year, I've traveled to all corners of the state, visiting 10 of our 12 regions. I will visit the other 2 next month. I've had the honor of having Patty by my side as we've had facilitated conversations around revenue, or the lack thereof, and the expenses and fiscal cliff many of us are facing. We surveyed our membership 2 years ago. 36% of you are already facing a fiscal deficit. And in the next couple years, another 59% we're expected to be, and we know those numbers have only grown in the last couple years. We heard the stories of the ways you are balancing your budgets as you are legally required to do. Some of you have come up with creative ways to raise revenue. But I've also heard the unfortunate stories of how some of you are facing deficits, cutting programs, and eliminating services. We are faced with rising inflation in materials and wages, including PERS and healthcare. We are faced with staffing shortages, growing community expectations, and continued unfunded mandates by our state and federal partners. We know our cities are hurting financially. That's why this year, the board has invested significant resources and time in trying to find workable solutions to help our growing economic crisis. We took part in a revenue reform initiative that has provided us with some hope for potential solutions that will help our cities. I would encourage you to stick around to hear about this on Saturday as part of our business meeting. There's also been some legal challenges at the federal level, legal changes at the federal level on homelessness. What does that mean at the state level, and how is the LOC going to address this? We will also discuss that on Saturday. This conference is jam-packed with ways to help you and your city. We have plenty of education, but there's also sessions and networking opportunities to connect you with cities. There are over 73 vendors here to support you and your city, the largest representative of vendors we've ever had. Please stop by and see how they can help your city, and while you're there, thank them for their sponsorship. They're the reason we can bring new dynamic speakers, great tours, and wonderful social events while keeping your registration cost affordable. Please take advantage of all this conference has to offer, and thank you for spending your personal time to make your cities and this state a better place to live, work, and play. And it is now my pleasure to welcome our host, Mayor Melanie Keebler of Bend.
Hi, everybody. Dave asked if I wanted a walkout song. I said no. Can't beat that, and I will not be doing air guitar. Welcome. Welcome to the great city of Bend. I'm so glad to have all of you here for this incredible conference. And I want to say, I hope all of you do this as well. Take credit for the weather as an elected. You're welcome. We have officially started nice, cool fall weather. We got rid of the smoke and the heat. And this is a little bit of a secret about Bend. This is kind of one of the best times to be here. So help us keep that secret, but please do come back and visit in October in the fall. And one word I wanted to give you to think about as we go through this conference is the word petrichor, which is that awesome desert smell that you get after it rains, which I hope you've all experienced. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what's been going on here in Bend as the city that you're in right now and how that connects with a lot of the work that's on your schedule here in the workshops. A couple of themes that I noticed that we're talking about a lot are resiliency and relationships. And I want to talk a few minutes about some of our key issues in Bend and how we've been leveraging those type of concepts to really move forward for our community. I'm going to start with housing, which I think is probably a top issue for most of us here in this room at the local level. We are in a housing crisis, as is most of this state. The median home price in Bend is right around $700,000. And that's almost double what the median income of families in Bend can afford. We also know that we have, as many of you are experiencing, a homelessness issue with far too many people without homes and living on the street or in their cars. And our count from this year was about 956 folks that were counted in the PIT count experiencing homelessness in Bend. So these numbers obviously present a very real challenge, as you all understand. We know that we're behind about 6,000 affordable housing units, and the funding that we receive, for example, through CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant, we need about 629% of what we actually get. We are incredibly oversubscribed when it comes to funding through that grant and others for housing. So we, historically as a city, have not backed down from this challenge, as I know all of you are working hard on it as well. Starting back in 2006, Bend was the first city to institute an affordable housing fee, which collects 1/3 of 1% of the total valuation of all building permits. And that program has collected over the years $6.4 million, which we have actually leveraged through investing in projects into another $106 million in public and private funding, and constructed 770 affordable units here in Bend. So we're really proud of being in the game on that early and working to develop all those relationships with our affordable home builders so that we have a clear pipeline to continue building affordable housing in Bend. We've also really leaned into passing some of them mandated by the state, some of them on our own initiative, regulations to reform zoning and building codes and development codes to remove barriers to housing. And we are leading the state in per capita in building housing in the last couple of years because of that work. We also have really leaned into ADUs, which I recommend for every city of every size as a gentle way to increase density and help with the housing problem. We're really excited this year that we are able to leverage some of the federal money that's out there, and we received a grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development for $5 million to continue working on these housing initiatives, including development code work, but also just direct investment into housing on the ground that we need. And that was successful because of those relationships that we have developed with not only our public partners, but our private home builders and affordable home builders here in Bend. So we've really been focusing on adding to the entire housing continuum. That includes the shelter system. And we now have 523 shelter beds, 216 of which are low barrier. I just last week attended an incredible project that was a private-public partnership to convert an old motel into 76 supported low-income apartments. For that transition step between the street, the shelter, and the market rate apartment, we've got to have something in between, and that's going to be targeted to vulnerable populations that really need those homes. And these efforts that we've been working on in the past years, since I was first elected in 2020, have resulted in a 5% decrease in people experiencing homelessness in Bend in our last PIC count. So we're really proud of that work. And I think the other story on the work on homelessness that I would emphasize for everyone is developing that coordination and collaboration across your nonprofit partners, your county, state, and federal partners, and leveraging every resource possible. We've also really leaned into, so we're surrounded with public lands, forests, BLM, all of these, which many of your cities are as well, and you have to bring those partners to the table and say, we are all part of solving this problem, because cities cannot do it alone. And I know we're going to be going to Salem to say, hey, yeah, cities cannot do this alone. We're on the forefront of this problem, but we need your help, and this is a statewide issue. I'll conclude there on housing. I'm just really glad to say that our efforts are working and we're going to keep going. The other issue I wanted to touch on is transportation. You've all been moving around Bend and getting here, so you can see that we've grown rapidly and not every bit of our transportation system is working as well as we'd like it to. We actually are expected to gain another 50,000 residents by 2045. So we're trying to catch up and get ready for that. I hope you love our roundabouts. We have over 50 roundabouts in Bend and more coming. And those are great for safety, and our residents are super used to them. A funny anecdote, we had a power outage a month ago, and sort of all of parts of 3rd, our main street, where there's a lot of lights, shut down, and people maybe kind of forgot what to do at a 4-way stop, because we don't have too many of those in Bend anymore. So the other aspect of Bend that's challenging for us is that we have a river and a railroad and Highway 97 dividing our city. So we've really leaned in the past couple of years thinking about those east-west connections on both sides of our city, making it easier to get across for everybody who uses all modes of transportation. Some of you might have gone on the Wilson Avenue tour to see some of the improvements we've made there. We really leaned into that connection, empowering people to ride their bike or drive and get across in a lower stress way than our main streets. And that was funded by a transportation geo bond, which links back to the revenue reform that Dave talked about. We had to ask the voters to help us to do that because our tax rate wasn't going to support it. Luckily they did, and we're going to see more projects like that coming in the next few years. We're also really proud of, in our Midtown area, we really need some connections to be, key connections to be made between the central district in Bend and the downtown of Bend to really work on redevelopment in the core of our city. And so we're incredibly pleased to have received over $30 million in state and federal grants to build an overcrossing for pedestrians and people who bike and roll, to really connect the heart of our downtown with the heart of our central city. And that's going to be an incredible catalyst for redevelopment in that area. So I think that going out for those federal grants really helps us to leverage our dollars in other places that we need them, because our dollars are precious as cities, as you know. And I think I will just conclude by saying I could talk with you about a lot of other topics, one of them being emergency management. We've experienced one of the worst fire seasons. I know that's affected all of your cities. It really affects us here with the quality of air and the access to the outdoors and our surrounding neighbors. And we've been really coordinating well with our rural fire district and other partners on fuels reduction work that we're responsible for, as well as our federal partners. But I don't have enough time to tell you all about that. The message I really want to give for everybody here is that at the local level, we're all doing really incredible work. And we're doing work on the issues that affect everybody's everyday lives, right? And I just want to thank everybody here. I know a lot of the public servants and electeds in the room, you don't get paid a lot to do this. You'd be really surprised what I receive in my bank account every month. And you're doing it for love of your community and to try to help your community to be good and great in the future. So I think if we leverage our relationships and work on the resiliency of our communities together and speak together as cities when we need to, I think we can make a bright future for all of our communities. And I'm really happy to have you here this time of year. I hope you get out and enjoy Bend. We've got a lot of great things to do and see and eat and drink. Let me know if you need a recommendation for anything. And enjoy the conference. I hope we all learn a lot and connect, and we're just really glad that you're here. Thank you.
All right, please welcome to the stage now the Executive Director of the League of Oregon Cities, Patty Mulvihill.
I did not pick that music. Kevin picked that music. And my screen's not turning, so here we go. Okay.
It's the 99th conference. That's why we picked.
That's why, okay. All right, so for those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Patty Mulvihill. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Oregon Cities. I'm super excited to be here today. I'm really excited to be here in Bend. Thank you, Mayor Keebler, and your entire city for hosting us. It was nice to wake up and maybe see mountains with snow. They look a lot better when they have a little bit of snow on them. So thank you for that. I also want to thank the LOC Board of Directors. Mayor Drotzman had all of them stand up today. They've been hugely supportive, and they play a huge role here in the conference. I especially want to thank Mayor Drotzman for all the support he's shown me and the entire LOC staff. We hope that we're going to provide a great experience for you guys over the next few days. Mayor Drotzman did have staff stand as well. We are here to help. He did mention we're all wearing t-shirts, so I have Moppin on mine. We also are all identified by a pink ribbon on our name badges. Please ask. We really are here to help you in any way we can. So I have two roles up here today. The first is to do housekeeping, which everybody loves. And the second is to conclude by having the honor of introducing our keynote speaker today. So we'll start with some housekeeping stuff. The first one, if you've been down in the vendor booth area at all, some of you may have noticed that we have a game happening this year. It's exhibitor bingo. You can pick up those forms at the registration desk. If you do a blackout for the bingo, you can submit it to potentially win a prize. There is a caveat. You have to come to the annual business meeting on Saturday. You have to stay for the entire meeting, and you have to be present to win. And if you're willing to do all of those things, you have 3 opportunities to win. The first is a free registration and 1 night of hotel accommodations at our annual conference next year in Portland. It will be our 100th conference, and it will be elevated in terms of the experience, so it's a pretty big prize this year. Another person would win a free registration to our spring conference, which is happening in North Bend next April. And a third winner will win one of our virtual trainings for free to use anytime between now and the end of 2025. Some of you are probably already using our conference app. Some of you in this room, Counselor and Mommy, are super obsessed with with the app games. I have no prizes if you win on the app, none, except bragging rights. Several of my board is super interested in the bragging rights. Okay, the annual business meeting this year. I know a lot of times all you think that we do is elect officers. We will do that again this year, but we also have a couple things that are a little bit different, which is why I'm really hopeful you'll attend. First, you will elect a new board of directors for 2025. A vice president, a treasurer, and 3 open director seats are going to be there. The second important thing is the board of directors is recommending that we amend the LOC Constitution. To amend the Constitution, which is one of our key governing documents, requires a vote of the membership. Essentially, what the board of directors is doing is they want to impose a code of ethics on themselves. They want to be subject to certain standards of professionalism and conduct. What that means is they'd also like to be able to kick, for lack of a better word, somebody off the board of directors if they violate those ethical standards. Removing somebody from the board does require a constitutional amendment. You should have received information on this in our bulletin. There will be information on the table, but we will be taking that vote. Each city has to have a voting delegate. So if your city wants to vote on the election of officers and the constitutional amendment, you need to have a voting delegate. If you haven't done it, you have time until right before the meeting starts. Just find a staff person at registration and we can register you as a voting delegate. We are not getting involved in disputes among your city. So if you all come to us and say, that's not the person who's supposed to be the voting delegate, that's not our problem. That's your problem. Okay? Mayor Drotzman referenced that we've been working on a revenue reform project for the last 8 months. We will have a brief update on what that will be and what it could mean for long-term fiscal stability for each of your cities. We will have a specific report on that during Saturday's annual business meeting. The other thing that we will update you on is yesterday the LOC Board of Directors met, and one of the key discussion items were what are going to be our legislative key priorities in 2024, 2025, and 2026. So our board has established 9 key priorities. Those aren't the only 9 things the LOC lobbyists will be working on next year, but the 9 major initiatives we will be pushing during the next legislative session. We will announce those to you during the annual business meeting. So please make sure you attend that. So that's my housekeeping stuff, all of the boring things. Now I get to go to the fun stuff. So it's my privilege today to introduce the keynote speaker. And before I do that, I owe a big debt of gratitude, and so does everybody here, to the sponsor for our keynote address, which is Portland General Electric. All right, nice, yes. Thank you. So PGE has been providing power to customers in Oregon for more than 130 years. Their service area includes a population of 1.9 million Oregonians and covers 51 of our 241 cities. The company meets Oregon's growing energy demands with a diverse mix of generation facilities that include water, power, wind, coal, and natural gas combustion. Now, unfortunately, a representative from PGE could not be here today. There was a health emergency. So I appreciate that you already clapped. We are recording this. If we could clap again for their general sponsorship, I'd appreciate it. And now for what I imagine most of you are actually in the room for. It's my privilege to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. He has dedicated his career to health equity, resiliency, and environmental justice. A physician and epidemiologist, he currently serves as the public health director for Michigan's largest and most diverse county, where he oversees everything from public health to veteran services for returning citizens. Every week on his podcast, America Dissected, he invites tens of thousands of listeners to go beyond the headlines with him and leading experts in science, public health, healthcare, public policy, and politics to explore the intersection between health and society. The award-winning show has earned national and international recognition and has been featured among the best podcasts in science by the New York Times. Dr. El-Sayed was the youngest health official in a major U.S. city when he was appointed as the health director for the city of Detroit, Michigan. We have a Detroit here too, doctor, so it's important that I say that. Your Detroit's a lot bigger than our Detroit. He led the Detroit Health Department to become a national leader in public health innovation and environmental justice, spearheading one of the fastest municipal public health turnarounds in American history. As a professor at Columbia University's Department of Epidemiology, Dr. El-Sayed became an internationally recognized expert in health policy and health inequalities. He was director of the Columbia University System Science Program and Global Research Analytics for Population Health. He has also taught at the University of Michigan. Anybody? There's like two. Okay, there you go. And American University. He has more than 100 peer-reviewed publications that have earned more than 3,000 citations. Please join me and welcome this esteemed doctor to our stage.
All right, good afternoon, Oregon Cities. That was good. You caught yourself at the end. I'm going to try that one more time because I think we get louder, all right? Good afternoon, Oregon Cities. There it is. I'm so grateful to be welcomed here, Mayor Keebler. Thank you. I felt particularly welcomed because Mayor Keebler is a graduate of this esteemed University of Michigan. And the interesting thing is, for all you ducks out there, welcome to the Big Ten. And what I worry is in a couple of weeks here, we are about to watch a duck eat a Wolverine. So that's all right. We won the Natty last year, so it's all good. I'm super grateful to be here with you all today, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to allow us to think a little bit beyond the general, beyond the specific details that often eat up so much of our time. Now, I spend my days leading a large bureaucratic institution. I have a good sense of what your days look like, right? And I'm asking us to take a step out of this. Before I start, I want to thank the team. Patty, you got my name perfectly. Thank you. Mayor Drotzman, thank you for having us here. And of course, Mayor Keebler, thank you for welcoming us to this lovely town. So I want to give you a sense of my background growing up. And I would spend most of my summers outside the United States. And I'll explain why. My parents immigrated to this country from Alexandria, Egypt. My father, he was the eldest son of a vegetable salesman, who was his father, and his mother, who never got to go to school. She raised 6 children in a one-bedroom apartment on the top floor of an apartment building in Alexandria. And my dad was a great student, and he was able to literally study his way out of Egypt. And when he graduated, he had a choice. He was either going to go to Bayreuth, Germany, or Detroit, Michigan. He wanted to be an automotive engineer. And he was like, listen, Germany is like 30 years post-World War II, so how about not? And the United States is a place where it doesn't matter how I pray, where I come from, I can be and do in this place. And my life in so many ways is a recouping of the investment that he made. But one of the things I'm most grateful for is that my dad didn't just leave. He left, but he sent me back every summer when I was a kid. So my folks, they would send me out to Egypt, usually before school ended. Now, why would they send me before school ended? Because the tickets are cheaper. So like literally everyone's getting ready for the end of school and I'm gone. I'm on an airplane, usually with another family that goes to Egypt. And I get there and I spend my summers in a place that looks nothing like the place that I was growing up in, but with people who look like me. And the experience was eye-opening. I'd spend most of my summers with my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and my cousins, but most of all, I would spend my time with my teta. This is taken when she was just before she got married, so she would have been 14 years old, okay? She was born in the 1940s in Alexandria. She was the 9th of 14 children in a place in a time where it didn't matter how smart you were, that you were not likely to go to school if you looked like her. And that was the case. She is, to this day, the smartest, wisest person I've yet to meet in my entire life. And I didn't know it at the time, because when you're getting shipped to another country to hang out with your grandparents, you're not usually happy about it when you're a kid. But I learned more about leadership hanging out with my grandmother those summers than I would learn in any job, in any training program for the rest of my life. And today, my goal is just to share some of that insight with you. So this is my teta when she was getting married, just as she got married to my grandfather, my Sayyid, who's what my last name is named after. And she was this person who, she had this quiet confidence. You've all met somebody like this. Everybody knows that they are the center of gravity in any room they walk into. But it's not because they're boisterous. It's not because they're loud. It's because you know if you needed something and you needed somebody to deliver, that was the person you talked to. That was my teta. And sitting at the lap of somebody like this, you learn a lot about how they lead, the way that they use their body, the words that they choose, the way that they can look at you and either build you up or shatter you based on what you need at the moment, even if you don't always want it. And I bring this to you because I know that in your day-to-day, like mine, you focus so much on the tactical, right? How often are you thinking about some HR issue here, some funding issue here, getting your contract, in my case, through county commission? And these are the things that take up your day. But too often, we think in the tactical, but we hope that that tactical becomes something strategic, and ideally that those strategies turn into something that aligns to a mission. And I think sometimes in spaces like this, it's helpful to step all the way back. So what I want to do today is I want to take you just quickly on a journey to Alexandria with me. And I want to focus on 5 leadership lessons that my teta taught me. And then from there, what I'd like us to do is think about how they apply to some of the bigger challenges that we face. Existential challenges, the kinds of things that lead to the kinds of challenges that Mayor Keebler talked about, that all of you all are dealing with in your cities every single day. So, 5 lessons. Now, I want you to imagine, you're 13 years old, okay? You just got off of a really, really long 15-hour trip. You're dead tired, but you're 15, so like tired doesn't feel like it does when you're 40 or 50, okay? And you really just want to sleep. And you walk in with your grandmother, and she starts pointing at your cousins. That one's smarter than you. That one, I don't have to tell you, is taller and better looking. That one over there, nicer, kinder hearted. That one's more athletic. This one is better to talk to. And by the end of this, having walked in with my American swagger, right, it's cut down the size a little bit. And I'd always ask Teta, what do I have going for me? And she said, you know what, you have the best thing of all. I was like, what's that? You get to leave. And the truth of the matter is, she could not have known how true that was. My cousins, who she pointed to, the one who's smarter than me, who actually is smarter than me, drives a cab in Egypt. It's not my life. And that has nothing to do with being smart. If it did, he would have a very different life. It had everything to do with the fact that I got to leave. I got to grow up in a place where my needs were tended to, not just by my parents, but by the community around me, by the public servants who made sure that I got vaccinated when I was a little boy, that I could have what I needed to nourish my brain at school. Guidance counselors who, when I was acting up in school, would sit me down and say, Abdul, yeah, a little bit of promise. I'm like, you should talk to my grandma. But she understood something profound, which is that opportunity is more important than talent. And I think sometimes in an individualistic society like ours, when someone succeeds, we give them that back fill of saying, well, it's because they were talented. And sometimes the other part of that is, well, when you say someone's talented, it excuses all the work that they did to manifest that talent. But even more so, it excuses the fact that as a society, we built a space where their talent could be nurtured. And I think as we think about the frame of what we do as public servants, recognizing that both on the personal level and then on the service level has to be foundational to the service that we render. Now, here's the thing. When I would travel to Egypt, I would travel about 15 hours, usually with a layover at Schiphol Airport. Anybody ever been to Schiphol in Amsterdam? So I got to know the Schiphol Airport way too well, all right? And 15 hours. I didn't have the language to articulate it at the time, but in those 15 hours, I would travel 10 years difference in life expectancy. And I had to grow up and become an epidemiologist to be able to actually quantify that, but I didn't need to. I could see it. The wrinkles on a face, the hunch of a back, the speed that people walked. And I think about my own grandparents. I'd watch them age like a disco ball. Every summer, they just look a little bit older. And then I'd come home and I'd see my other grandparents. So I didn't mention this. You talked about there's a Detroit, Oregon. There's a St. Louis, Michigan, all right? And general rule of thumb, if there's a city you've heard of in a state you've heard of, but it's not the right one, it's a real small town, right? And my mom who raised me, her name is Jackie Johnson. Now she's Jackie El Sayed. So in my household, I had these twin contrapositives. I had Soad and Sayed in Egypt, and I had Jan and Judy Johnson, now living in Hamburg, Michigan. And you'd watch them age at a different pace. And understanding that, that's a big reason I decided to become a doctor. But it's also helpful to think a little bit about what that tells us about differential experiences. It would take me another decade to understand the causes of why people in Egypt always seemed so much sicker. And a lot of that had to do with colonialism. Egypt is a place that is stuck under the thumb of a whole set of international politics that render its people poorer. And in a lot of ways, what is colonialism except for like what racism is when it goes international, right? But here's the crazy thing. When my teta came to the United States, she had this gauzy sense of what America was, right? She knew that I had opportunity, that this was a land of opportunity, and for me that worked out. But she couldn't have understood the full experience of what it means to be an American. And I remember driving her through Detroit and her saying, "This is the Egypt of America." And here's the crazy thing. When I was in college, I came across a paper written by Chris Murray. And Chris Murray's lab is focused entirely on understanding differences and measuring out differences in big metrics, like life expectancy. And the thesis of the paper was this, that there were, if you looked at patterns of life expectancy, there were 8 Americas. And the crazy thing is my teta had said that back in the 90s. And so she's right, that at the end of the day, what differentiates these Americas has everything to do with the way that race and access to wealth and income start to compound in different places, in large part because of the choices that people sitting in seats like ours have made through history. And so the second lesson that my teta taught me is that human challenge is fractal. Now, fractal is one of those words that everybody kind of hears. Fractal simply means that it displays the same pattern independent of the scale at which you look at it. So there are global inequities that we see between Egypt and America. There are inequities that we see between states, and then there are inequities that we see just inside of towns themselves. Global challenges are fractal. And that's important for us to understand because sometimes it's easy for us to divorce ourselves from a set of challenges by saying, well, that's a problem over there. Rather than asking, well, what is the Egypt of Bend, Oregon? What is the Egypt of Portland? What is the Egypt of you name the town? This is a picture of my dad when he was born. He was about a year. And he was cute. He's not cute anymore. It's okay, though. And my dad, I never really appreciated this, but the fact of his existence is actually an unlikely thing because he was born in the 1960s in Egypt. And I just want to show you infant mortality in Egypt in the 1960s, okay? 1965, right around when he was born, the infant mortality rate out of 1,000 lives was 185. So if you're doing the math, nearly 1 in 5 babies in Egypt died before the age of 1. And I already told you about the socioeconomic circumstances in which he was born. He was born to a vegetable salesman and an illiterate mother. So his risk would have been substantially higher. And frankly, he had 2 siblings who died just after him. So my grandmother, she gave birth to 8, raised 6. Her personal infant mortality rate was 25%. Now, this is my dad and I fishing in Missouri in what would have been like 1992. And he and I had a very close relationship. But my dad grew up in a place, in a time, where if he was not the best student in his class, that was his ticket. And that ticket would get pulled away. So you can imagine the competitiveness, right? The whole thing that they say about immigrant parents is all true, okay? Here's the interesting thing. When you're brown and Muslim like me, and you tell your parents that you want to be a doctor, most of the time they throw you a party. Not my dad. I remember telling him on a day just like that one that I wanted to be a doctor. And the reason I wanted to be a doctor was because I was making all these observations about what I was seeing in Egypt versus America, in Detroit versus Bloomfield Hills, a rich suburb where I grew up. And he just looked at me and be like, why would you do something stupid like that? I was like, I'm sorry, what? He's like, why would you do that? I was like, I want to take care of people. And he was like, okay, that's what you want to do. I never understood that. Funny thing is, I've got a brother. My brother's also a doctor. So maybe it's just a spite thing. But I never really understood it until I decided to interview my dad about infant mortality. Now, I had never heard him tell his side of the story about watching his siblings die. But this is how it happened. First, he had a sister. He was 3. And she got really sick. And then his mom took her to the hospital, and she never came back. And then 2 years later, he had a brother. Now he's 5 years old. And parents here know that the level of conscientiousness about what's happening differs a lot from 3 to 5. The feelings are still there, but the ability to articulate what's happening and understand cause and effect grows quite a bit in those 2 years. And his brother got really sick, and he had some sort of GI illness, probably typhoid fever. And his brother ended up vomiting on a rug. And then his mom took his brother to the hospital, and he never came back. And my dad, who's 5 at the time, for days, wouldn't allow anybody to wash that rug because it was the last thing he had of his brother. And I share this with you Because for my dad, distrust in the medical establishment runs deep, very deep. Hospitals are places where your siblings go to die. That's what my dad learned. So when I told him I wanted to be a doctor, you can imagine what was motivating his sense of frustration with my career decision. And the third lesson here is that institutional trust is really hard to gain and is really easy to lose. And when you've got people who have a sense of a set of institutions that is driven by failure or frustration, it's really tough to get them to trust again. In the end, my dad was actually proud of me when I graduated medical school. And I spent 7 years studying how to manipulate and maneuver data to answer questions about health. I learned how to do that at the micro level for patients. I learned how to do that at the macro level as an epidemiologist. Okay? A whole lot of time getting what I tell my students is being mismented. We all know what being demented is, right? Being mismented. What do I mean by that? Everybody see Aladdin? Great movie. I mean, kind of. The fact that, like, she has a pet lion or tiger, and she's, in theory, from the Middle East is kind of problematic. My wife, who is Indian, and I, who is Egyptian, were like, hey, our daughter could be Jasmine. Anyway. I remember hearing this story before the movie ever came out. You know why? My teta told me this story. My teta was somebody who couldn't read. But I told you she was brilliant. Everything she learned, she heard. What do you think about that? Everything she learned because somebody told her something. And so she had this ability to tell a story. And I remember when she described Jafar, which is the right way of saying Jafar, okay? And I could see Jafar in my mind. And I remember watching this movie and be like, you got him all wrong. All right? You got him wrong. But she had this ability. She would take this oral tradition of storytelling. So Aladdin is one of what we call Alf Layla wa Layla, which literally means 1,001 nights. Okay? And you tell these stories over time at night. And every night when we would go to bed, our teta would pick a story and she'd describe in detail aspects of who these people were. It was like she was bringing them to life in your mind. Best storyteller you've ever met. And here's the thing about it, though. She would then use this when she'd try and correct your behavior. She'd be like, don't be a Jafar. And you knew exactly what she was talking about. And she would do this story after story. So here's the thing. People like me go and get fancy educations. We learn how to interpret statistics. And then we think everybody else also got fancy education and learned how to interpret statistics, which is insane. Because most people did not go and get all that education to learn statistics. So we sit here and talk to folks about odds ratios, which is like odd is in the word, and try and explain these dynamics. And the frustrating thing is we forgot how to talk to normal people. My teta never forgot that. When I teach, I often remind folks, imagine you had a boy and a well, and you've got a parent, okay? And let's take us back 1,500 years, just to make it easy, okay? And the boy is getting close to the well. Every time the parent looks, the boy's just a little bit closer. And the parent has two approaches to intervening. One might look like this. Son, yeah? I don't know if you've seen the most recent study in the Journal of Well Studies, but they found that there was a statistically significant relationship between approaching the well within 100 feet and grievous bodily injury. My interpretation of this study suggests that you would do well to reduce your probability of falling in the well by taking 5 steps back. The other approach looks like this. Hey, Billy. Yeah? Have you seen Johnny lately? No. Okay, when you see Johnny, Tell him we've all been looking for him for a while. Yo, what happened to Johnny? He fell in the well. So what does Billy do? You must have experience with a very rambunctious child. That's the first time I heard that response. Because that's exactly what I would have done. You see the kid be like, Johnny! So it's a different way of explaining risk, right? Which one is more compelling? So here's the thing about it. Most people are like my teta. Most people have learned most of what they learned because somebody told them something, not because they read it. And it's actually logically far harder to understand the Billy and Johnny story. You actually have to make a leap. But our brains evolved to do this because this is how we work. And so when we go and get mismented in fancy educational spaces, right, where we sit in rows and look at PowerPoint slides and then memorize them and then get quizzed on them and then be told we have a nice degree and people pay us more, weird. What we are doing is changing the way we think. And it's not natural. And my teta understood the power of teaching through stories. And that's the fourth lesson. Stories, narratives are more persuasive than numbers. Numbers are really good. I'm an epidemiologist here, okay? Nobody like go out and tweet and be like, Abdul doesn't believe in numbers. I believe in numbers. I'm just telling you they're not a great way to communicate. Numbers tell you what to communicate, not how to communicate. Stories are how you communicate. So my teta ended up passing away when I was 16. And I never got to say goodbye to her. But I think a lot about her every day. And when I'm making really hard decisions, that's usually when I think about her. And here's the reason why. Not only was she brilliant and a leader and somebody who shaped my life in pretty profound ways, but my teta never stepped foot into an institution. Okay? I'm showing you all the institutions I was a part of before my age of 30. Okay? From the day I turned 3 and I walked into a pre-K, I was institutionalized. And the reason I share that is because there's an implicit logic inside institutions. Institutions, like all of your cities, like all the schools you've gone to, they declare a mission, a vision, values. And then sometimes what they do is a little bit different than the mission, vision, and values. And my teta, as somebody who's been failed by institutions, from the day she never got to walk into one, through her life, understood that sometimes what an institution says is not what an institution does. And I don't say this to sow mistrust in institutions. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But I'm trying to show all of us who've been institutionalized our whole lives why sometimes people who don't have strong relationships to institutions don't always trust them. And sometimes working inside institutions, we blind ourselves to the delta between what the stated mission, vision, and values are and the emergent mission, vision, and values are. And I say this because as leaders of institutions, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we lead? And what do we lead for? And my grandmother, I think about what she would say when I make leadership decisions about how I'm leveraging and maneuvering my institution. And there's a level of clarity there about what morals and ethics would say we do and what an institution might reward me for doing. Because that's the thing about it. I want you to think about all the awards you've ever gotten. Oftentimes, those awards are given for the kind of leadership that moves an institution further along its emergent mission, vision, and values. Leaders don't always get awards for trying to ask, hey, is there a way for us to do better here? And to me, the analogy that comes to mind is in physics. You guys know what acceleration is in physics? You guys know what the accelerator is, right? The accelerator is actually probably not the only way you can physically accelerate a car. The other way is the steering wheel. In physics, acceleration is either increasing the speed on a current trajectory or it's changing trajectory. And I think the lesson of my teta to me is that leaders, good leaders, accelerate. There are leaders out there who don't accelerate anything. But good leaders accelerate. However, the question is ultimately, does that mean increasing velocity or does that mean changing direction? And I think when I contemplate what my teta would have asked, more often than not, the changing direction part is the part we miss. Because most institutions don't reward it. But my teta understood that. And I hope that all of us, when we think about these decisions, we are able to think about ourselves outside of this institution and ask, what is the current trajectory of this institution? Is it consistent with the stated mission, vision, and values? Or does leadership here mean changing direction? I want to step back now. We talked about 5 lessons. I want to think a little bit about how we can apply them to some of the challenges that if you don't face today, you will face. But I want us to step backwards, right? So often when we think about some of the challenges that we talked about, things like unfunded mandates, right? Things like not ever getting enough funding for the mandates that currently exist. Oftentimes they're downstream of bigger picture challenges that we're trying to take on. And so I want to think a little bit about some of those. What you're seeing here is a graph. On the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis is the percentage of children earning more than their parents. Now, this graph is deeply inconsistent with what my teta would have believed America should be. We probably should have done some changing direction at some point. But what you're seeing here is that in this country, over the past several decades, the probability that a child is going to earn more than their parents is dropping. So the idea about this being the land of opportunity is inconsistent with the data that we see here. All right? And what that means is that opportunity itself is dwindling for young people. Now, I'm looking across the audience. How many folks here self-identify as being Gen Z? Hey. How you doing? I'm a millennial, as evidenced by my slick back hair and my short socks. But I have siblings who are Gen Z. I'm the oldest. And we rag on Gen Z a lot. But I think part of that is just like everybody's like, oh, the kids these days, right? Everybody, right? Everybody said that. But actually, the kids these days, there are some profound challenges that they face. We talked a bit about housing. The idea that somebody in Gen Z is going to be able to buy a house similar to the one they grew up in would mean that they would have to, on average, be earning at least $300,000 by the time they are in their mid-20s. Not happening, y'all. Structurally, that is not a possibility in this economy. Some of them will, right? And God bless you all, but most of them won't. Millennials, same story to a lesser degree. And a lot of that has to do with access to opportunity. Now, remember what my teta said about, or my teta didn't actually say this, but my teta's lesson about things being fractal? That differential in opportunity, right, it's not a nationwide question only. It also, these disparities exist in our own community. So what I've done here is taken a page out of the Opportunity Atlas. Raj Chetty and colleagues, Raj Chetty is an economist at Harvard, and they wanted to map opportunity in the United States. And I'm just zooming in here on Oregon and on where we are, okay? And I really encourage you to take a look at this because what this metric shows you is the proportion who will out-earn their parents. This is inflation-adjusted dollars, because if we didn't adjust for inflation, nobody's going to out-earn their parents, right? Or actually, if we didn't adjust, everybody would out-earn their parents, which would just be funny money. And so you're seeing here that we got challenges, and it doesn't matter where you go. And I can zoom out and get the same results. But there's an added complication here, okay? Anybody here got a subscription to ChatGPT? You know how many job descriptions in the Wayne County Health Department have been written by ChatGPT? But here's the thing about ChatGPT. It's a mediocre manager of information. I would also argue that a recent college graduate is a mediocre manager of information. When we think about AI and the implications of what it's going to do to the job market, oftentimes we think about our own jobs because we're just selfish, right? Everybody's like, is my job going to get? No. You know why? Because y'all have had enough time in a working space where you've learned some skills, gotten some experiences, and built a network. But for recent college graduates coming out today, that's going to be a very different story. And so that difference in access to opportunity, as you think about how it intersects with the growing capacity of AI, is going to fundamentally upend access to opportunity in a generation-dependent way. And I think we have to think about how that disrupts the social contract fundamental to how we think about building a life in a capitalist society. I sell my time, I earn money, I invest that money in my life in some kind of way. What happens when the ways in which you've trained to sell your time, a computer can do for very, very cheap? And I think we really need to be thinking ahead of that challenge. Because if we think the housing crisis is bad now, ask yourself what happens when a whole generation of folks are locked out of information economy types of jobs. Now look, people will debate what the long-term implications of AI will be. I promise you, there is enough money and enough compute that is going into AI that it's going to be pretty good. It's not going to be perfect today, but it's going to be pretty good. So in my field, in medicine, AI is diagnosing diabetes in chest x-rays. So think about what that means. Y'all know what diabetes is? It's a dysregulation of hormones such that your muscles and your tissues don't get a signal to take up glucose. So you end up having more glucose in your blood, okay? There's absolutely no reason you should see that on a chest x-ray. However, if you've trained the most remarkable pattern recognition technology in history to identify patterns, and you've trained it on every chest x-ray ever taken, plus patient histories, you're going to find some really interesting things. So now you ask yourself, okay, what is the future of radiology? I don't know. My little brother, who's currently a resident in medicine, he can set his phone on the counter, and that phone can listen to the exchange he's having with a patient, and then generate his note with a full differential diagnosis. You know what the point of going to medical school is? To learn how to do a differential diagnosis. And all he's got to do is have a conversation. And what's even more wild is now it's prompting questions. So then what happens when you're not even the one asking questions, it's just AI? You become a skin for the AI. So ask yourself, what's the value of a $300,000 physician? And then the final point I want to put on this is, AI is a tool, okay? And any tool is a function of what the user wants to do with it. You take a hammer and you put it in the hands of a construction worker, and that's a pretty incredible tool to build homes. You put it in the hands of a serial killer, it's a whole different thing. And the point I want to make to you is, ask yourself, who's invested in an AI? Who owns AI? The richest, most powerful corporations in the country. So the implications of what it's going to be used for, right, should be completely politically agnostic here, are that the whole goal is going to be around reducing cost for everyone else who's buying access to the AI. What is cost when you're talking about AI? Labor bottom line, FTEs. So just, I want us to be thinking about these questions. So opportunity matters more than talent, but opportunity environment is already failing young people. It's contributing to mistrust, frustration, disengagement, and AI is just going to exacerbate this. Now, what you're seeing here is another graph of time, all right? And on the y-axis, what you're looking at here is income gains over the post-war decades that are stratified by income percentile. So over time, up until about 1980, you saw a pretty even distribution of income gains. And then right around 1980, you start to see that these curves unravel, and you see more of the gains being taken up by the richest folk, okay? Now, that's not it. Ask yourself then about what that means in terms of accumulation of wealth over time among the richest versus the poorest folk. And then ask yourself about what that means for overall wealth. So on the top, you're seeing a pie chart of distribution of before tax income in 2016. And then on the bottom, you're seeing distribution of wealth, not just income, wealth. All right, so that's accumulated income. And the top 1% account for about 24% of income and about 40% of wealth. So the wealth gains are even bigger. Now ask yourself about housing challenges, right? One of the most interesting things that's happening in so many of our communities, especially I would imagine a place like Bend, is that people who have excess capital do what? They invest it. Real estate's a pretty good investment. So what you can do is then buy up excess real estate. And what's happening over time is that you're getting more speculation. Now, it doesn't account for all of the challenges we're seeing, but it does account for a small percentage. And the challenge is I worry that this will get bigger and more important with time. And then finally, when you stratify that by education level and race, you start to see massive gaps between the two. So what you're seeing here is the Gini coefficient. It's a measure of inequality in different counties across the country, all right? Now, I want you to look at this graph and just get a sense of where it's darker. Darker is worse, all right? Higher Gini coefficient is more inequality. Where is it darker? And then what I'm going to show you is a map by county of life expectancy among the poorest folks in a given county, all right? So I'm going to go back one more time just so you get the sense. You get the sense that there's a bit of an overlap. It's not perfect. But when you correlate Gini coefficient and life expectancy among the poorest folks, there is certainly a correlation there. All right? And the point I want us to make here is that human challenges are fractal and inequities are becoming more pervasive on a local level. All right? And thinking through that is going to be really, really important. But here's the interesting thing about inequity. In the richest counties in America, lower income folks, I would even say middle income folks, if you go to like San Francisco, right? Middle income folks get priced out of living in the community in general, right? And so you start to ask yourself, what happens when you can't actually create space for the folks who are providing a lot of the basic services that are not transportable, that you gotta have to do in your local community, like being a nurse or being a firefighter. So I don't have to tell you all this. People don't trust the government, right? And what you're seeing here is government trust over time. And that trend is not great, all right? But it's not just government that people aren't trusting. What you're seeing here is trust in different forms of media. So let me just orient you to this graph here, okay? On the far right of the graph, all right, you've got all adults, and then the three different graphs are trust in local news orgs. The one under it is national news orgs. And the one under that is social media sites, okay? And then it's stratified by time, so 2016 to 2023, all right? And then as you move from the right to the left, you're seeing different age groups, all right? So 65 and up, 50 to 64, 30 to 49, and then 18 to 29. And there's a couple of trends that become apparent pretty quickly, right? Generally, if you look at the way any one curve looks, it's starting to slope downwards. What it's telling us is that over time, our trust in traditional media is going down, and then the yellow graphs trend upward, which tells us that the trust in social media is going up, okay? And then as you move backwards by age, younger people trust social media more and traditional media less. But it's not just media that people don't trust, it's science. Right? So like, here's the crazy thing to me. If you look at an iPhone, you know how much accumulated science goes into making an iPhone? So you're getting everything that's telling you that you shouldn't trust science because of science. It boggles the mind. Anyway, the proportion of people who think that science is generally for the public good is dropping. So we're seeing a general drop in trust, whether you're talking about science, or you're talking about the media, or you're talking about government. And so that tells us that there's some real disconnect between institutions and the people that they're meant to serve, all right? And that's largely because institutional trust is easy to gain, it's hard to lose, and we live in a time where that's become so much worse. Why? Ask yourself how often you see gotcha media about you name the institution, right? It's like if you had to boil down the implicit curriculum of Instagram in one point, it shows you the highlight reel of all your friends' lives and the lowlight reel of the rest of the world. So you're left saying, man, I can't even trust that. Everyone's out to get me. And the tough part is, when you have a fracturing of the media space, there are always going to be idea entrepreneurs who can build a little niche for themselves, selling all kinds of crazy stuff. And then you build a parasocial relationship with them because they live in your pocket, right? And you're like, I only trust that one guy. I'm like, why? I don't know. You're like, well, because the algorithm fed him to you. You're like, yeah, that's true. But he looks like he's talking just to me. I'm like, yeah, that's how it works. Y'all know who this is, right? FDR. You guys know what he's doing here? He's doing a fireside chat. Who said that? A+. Fireside chat. FDR, as they say about him, they said he had a third-rate mind and a first-rate temperament. I don't know, I'm sure he was really smart. But the point is that he understood people. There was a story about a man who was weeping when his funeral car passed him. And they said, oh, did you know him? He said, no, but he knew me. FDR was a master at narrativizing the moment. He was able to take the country through two of the biggest crises it had ever gone through, the Great Depression and then World War II, and to sew together a coherent narrative about what was happening, why it was happening, and what we were going to do about it. And he did that by consistent communication. All right? Now look, where's my mayor who's like the social media champ? You don't all have to be as good at social media as her. However, you've got to think a bit about how do you drive a consistent narrative. What is a narrative? It explains where I'm coming from. It explains where I am, and explains where I'm going. Leadership, if nothing else, if you've ever worked in a large organization, you consistently are constantly narrating to the team you're leading, this is where we were, this is where we are today, and this is where we're going. And when there's a pivot, you can say, something's changed. We were there, now we're here. We were going to go there, but let me explain why we're actually going to go here. And the challenge, if you've ever worked for an erratic leader, is like, wait, why are we doing this? How often does that happen to you? Every once in a while, the whole thing changes. You're like, wait, what? Why are we doing this? Narrating what's happening and why is the work. Stories are more persuasive, but too few leaders are willing to invest in a clear, purposive narrative that explains what people are feeling. All right, this one's going to hurt, okay? Kids these days, right? Always looking at their phone. So what you're seeing here is two bar graphs, all right? On the top, it's the proportion of parents who say that their teen is distracted by way of online social media, okay? And all the parents these days, my kid. And look, this is all true. I mean, we've traded the real-life simulacrum of one another for social media, which in a lot of ways is pretty antisocial because all you're doing is doing this with a phone. But I'll tell you this, I have a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. And the number of times when I'm having time with them that I reach to my pocket and I pick up my phone because I'm a dopamine fiend like all the rest of us, and I'm stuck on this phone, that explains that second graph there, okay? The proportion of teens who say their parents are distracted, all right? How many of y'all are on Instagram? Any of y'all? Okay. Here's the thing, especially for the younger folks. When you put up a picture and you think you're looking kind of fly, kind of cute, right? You put that picture up, then what do? You just leave it there? You check it. For what? For the likes. We all want likes. Especially those of you who are elected office, you want a lot of likes in the form of votes. But we all want the likes, right? But I want you to think about what that does for us. I don't know about you all. I was a freshman in college when the Facebook came out. I was one of the first 10,000 people on the Facebook, okay? And I thought it was kind of cool and it was kind of fun. I had no idea it was going to destroy everything, okay? But I was one of the first 10,000. And at that time, I didn't have that, like my teta said, had very little going for me, but I had a really, really long attention span. I could sit and focus on something for hours and hours and hours. You know when the last time I fully read a book was? When Facebook started. Anyway, that's not true. But the point I'm making is my attention span is trash now. I can barely focus on anything without having to look at my phone, to check my email, to look at my cute picture that I put up, and my tita would have been like, your cousin's cuter, right? I can't focus. We talk a lot about adult onset ADHD and the spike of ADHD. Now here's the interesting thing. A decade ago, we were talking about obesity. And everybody was looking at genetics, right? And what food to eat or not to eat. And everybody still does, okay? But the interesting thing about it is that the average serving size and the cost of corn and beef had dropped precipitously in large part because of public policy that subsidized the growing of these things. Obesity is an environmental disease with individuals who are more susceptible. I want you to think about ADHD. In a world where you have huge corporations who spend trillions of dollars to steal your eyeballs and eardrums to look at this thing, how hard is it to resist? And I'd argue to you that in some parts, yes, ADHD is an important disease, and there are a lot of people who struggle with it. However, it is an environmental disease with differential probability of being affected by it. And I say this as somebody who watched my own attention span tank the more I got on my phone. But here's the point that I'm trying to make to you, is that when your attention span drops and you're focused on a very, very short cycle of gratification, ask yourself about whether or not you think in your work you are able to set a long-term strategy and see it through. Or are we so focused on short-term wins that we cannot do the work of accelerating by changing direction because it's harder? And instead, we are more interested in the likes. And I worry that the implicit curriculum of social media these days has made us all less able to set a long-term strategy and see it through, because none of us have the patience to do it. So, too often, as leaders, we're motivated by short-term incentives rather than long-term vision, mission, and values. I'll leave that there for a second. But if my teta taught me anything, right, is that even as the dumbest, shortest, ugliest, I had something going for me. And so in every challenge, there are opportunities, right? If opportunity matters more than talent, if you can nurture an opportunity environment that fosters equity and invests in talent, you can succeed. But you have to see what's coming. And it takes a paradigm shift around asking, what is the vision for what we're trying to create here? And how do we address the gaps that are getting, admittedly, wider and wider for folks in our communities? And if human challenges are fractal, so can human flourishing be. And the difference is fundamentally about choices that we make, about asking about how do you nurture flourishing in the spaces that we all have ownership over. Institutional trust is really hard to gain, and it's even easier to lose. But given that we live in an era of transparency, I actually think it is easier today to win it by being deeply consistent and being a reliable narrator of the situation in which we find ourselves. And I think that reliability of being able to be like, check the record, look at my receipts, I've been telling you, this is where we were, This is where we are today, and this is where we're going. And people can, in this era, check the record, right? It's easier to do. And I think in a moment like this, a lot of us worry that the more you put yourself out there, the more folks are going to take you out of context, the more that you're going to get gotcha. I understand all that. But the only way around it is through it. And I think the way to do it is to ask, how am I going to engage? Set your goal and then be consistent about it. And you don't got to say everything. You don't got to do the latest TikTok dance, please. I see a lot of you don't do the latest TikTok dance, okay? Myself included. But if you can build a consistent thing where people can rely that you're going to be out there telling them what's what, people actually look for that. Because I'll tell you, and I know this is the truth for all of you, it's disorienting. Everyone is yelling at everyone all the time. So just by being able to be stable and consistent, I think it really goes a long way, right? But more than anything else, you got to be honest about what you're doing. And I think the biggest frustration that people have these days is that they're told one thing and they get another. And yeah, governing is really hard. And there are a lot of reasons why. But the more you can say, here are the challenges, here are the opportunities, and here's what we're doing about them. I'm not promising you the moon, but I am promising you that tomorrow's going to be a little bit better, and here's how we're doing it. I think when people see that you're trying and that you are delivering what you said you would deliver and you are consistent, I think that really matters. And I think too often people get frustrated by institutions because they see their communications as being dishonest, as being phony, and then over time, circumstances don't bear out to what you said you were going to do. And I think the consistency of the conversation, the ability to be honest with people about here's what the challenges are, and here's what we're going, and here's what we're doing, I think that's where the gold is, okay? And I also happen to know a thing or two about running for office, okay? And I've never won elected office, so I shouldn't be telling you all anything. But I happen to know that most people who run for office think about doing it again and think about running for bigger offices. And more often than not, the ability to build a conversation with people is really about what it takes to build the kind of base that if you chose to run for something else, you could do, right? But that base of people, right, in the end, they're really people who tune in consistently to understand how you think about the world and what you think you can do about it. That's really, at the end of the day, what we're all in the business of doing, right? And being consistent, being honest, being truthful, and again, being consistent, I think is really where the name of the game is. So I leave you with my teta. I think all of you have somebody like this in your life. And in those moments where things are hard and you're frustrated and you're like, why the hell did I ever do this job in the first place? For me, it really helps to think about her. This is a woman who lost 2 of her babies before the age of 1. And so I think about the charmed life that I get to live and how tough my life is. And I'm like, damn, like I get to show up for people like her. That's the price. It's worth its weight in gold. And all of us get to do that. So whoever your teta is, understand they're not as cool as my teta, but whoever your teta is, right? I hope that you can really think a little bit about what it was that they were teaching you, right? What it was that they were hoping for you. And understand that I can tell you that my grandmother could never have imagined the life I get to live. And in so many ways, I really wish I could go back to her and say, thank you. Really, thank you. For everything that you did, thank you. With that, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity of being here. I encourage you, if you're not sick of hearing me talk already, I talk a lot as a profession on a podcast. You can tune in. But really, really appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
Do you want to do some questions?
Happy to. Yeah. Thank you.
Where is Kevin? Are we doing questions?
I think I'm allowed to take some questions, but not hard ones, okay? Easy ones.
There are some microphones spread across the room. Who has a question? Michael.
Hi, thank
Hey.
you so much for being here. I went to Wayne State.
Hey!
Yeah, social work.
I got to tell you a story about Wayne State, but ask your question. I'll tell you a story.
I was just wondering, when you looked at, do you think that coming up with the change in trajectory versus direction going forward stems from work as a person that is invested in healing? Because I know for me as a social worker too, there's a mindset that invites big change, and not everyone else might be comfortable with it sometime, but it's a key to healing often. And I'm just curious how much that informs.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll tell you my story about Wayne State. So the reason my dad came to America is because he had a full ride scholarship to do a PhD at Wayne State. So Wayne State is like a big deal in our household. So when I went to Michigan, my dad was like, whatever. I really appreciate the question. So I think a lot about, healing forces you to, we talk a lot about speaking truth to power, right? That's like a big motif, as it's part of the zeitgeist, in the vibes, as the youths would say. And I actually think it's harder to speak truth to pain. And I don't practice medicine day to day. And folks ask me, is like, how does going to medical school translate to what you do? I'm like, I run a health department, but also, I learned a lot about sitting with people who were in profound pain and actually having to tell the truth to them. So you get a situation where somebody is writhing in pain. I remember watching this incredible doctor. A guy comes in with a gunshot wound, and he has his hands on the wound, and he won't let anybody touch it, and he is hulking out, like, can't move him, he's a big guy. And I remember the doctor just telling everybody to stop, because everyone's trying to get his hands off of it, and she just tells everybody to stop, and she looks at him, and she's like, hey, I know it really, really hurts. And trust me, I don't want to make it hurt more. But the thing I want you to understand is I'm here to help you, and if I can't do what needs to be done, this could kill you. So I want you to just move one hand. And first I'm going to look at it, okay? And then I'm going to ask you to move your other hand, and then we're going to give you something to make it feel better. And just watching this guy come to, like, just see the empathy in her was, it was really quite magical. And how often in our work do you have to interact with people who are pissing mad at you for something that you did? And frankly, something that you had no choice but to do, or don't see it from a different perspective. And I think there's something about being able to sit with those folks and speak the truth that I think can be really powerful, but it takes a level of finesse, right? And I think so often for us, we kind of want to walk away from that and just be like, those idiots don't get it, right? Versus stepping in and sitting down and saying, this is somebody who's dealing with a lot of pain. Let me see where your pain is and go from there. Now, when you think about big structural change, there is something about seeing enough people and enough of their pain to be like, this is effed up and we have to fix it, right? But the other part of it is also, I think sometimes if we brought the same empathy in those conversations, we might do better. And I think about sometimes a lot of the folks who are proponents of big structural change think that the empathy that they need to show to people who are in pain can be left by the wayside when you're working with colleagues who don't see it the same way you do, right? And I think sometimes that's why we miss out on the opportunity to create change, because it turns out when you say it louder, it's not usually more persuasive, right? And so I think there's something about the motivation that comes with that, but there's also something about the way, the approach that being able to sit with somebody in pain teaches us that I think we also need to bring to a lot of the public service work that we do. And I've been thinking a lot about the question of sustainability these days, and not just like big capital S sustainability, but like, I'm gonna go on a huge tangent here, but I promise it'll make sense. So I'm at the end of this month, I'll hit a big life milestone. I turned 40. And I know for a lot of folks, you'll be like, oh. No, but let me explain what I mean by this. When I was a kid, I was a pretty good athlete, and everything I did when it came to athletics was about being faster or stronger or whatever. And I'm coming to the realization that I'm never going to be faster or stronger than I was back then. Like, that's done for me. And so what's the goal? And it's interesting, in epidemiology we have this thing called a hazard curve, which when you're comparing in a study the probability of dying of people having, like, you name the medication, and you constantly are looking at, like, all right, did the people on the medication die slower than the people who were not on the medication? And if they died slower, that's a good thing. And so what I'm thinking about now is like, oh, I'm just riding a hazard curve, right? Like, I just need to stay around longer. Like, that's the goal. And I think in bureaucratic situations, when you're trying to create change, oftentimes the last woman standing wins, right? And so if you're just sitting there being like, I'm still going to be here, still going to be talking about it, and we're going to get there, oftentimes people will just get tired of fighting with you, and soon enough you win. You know what I mean? And I think that ability to just have some finesse in that space, rather than constantly trying to, like, win it tomorrow, I actually think that that's the coin of the realm. I could be wrong, though.
Any other questions?
We got one up here.
So one thing I've experienced a lot of, and you alluded to that, is that a lot of times we disagree with other people because we have different information sources. And the way the social media works right now, everybody's looking at information that makes sense to them, but you don't even have. So what is your suggestion on how to make sure that we have a broad enough spectrum of information and not just whatever the algorithm that's chosen for us to watch that day?
I love your question. I'm going to reframe it, I think, a little bit to say, I can tell you're a super rational guy. And I think most of us, I mean, I think I'm really rational too, but I'm actually really emotional. And the point I'm making here is, I like to think that I have seen evidence which has moved my thinking, which has led to my belief. I actually have come to believe that oftentimes I have belief that leads me to seek out certain evidence that leads me to rationalize what I think. See what I mean? And I think what happens over time, and this is the trick mirror, if nobody's read the book Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino, I highly recommend it. I think what we're not realizing is more and more of our intellectual, socio-emotional framing has been driven by what we are exposed to as a function of an algorithm we fell down. And so what happens over time is really good content creators, whether it's a speaker or a writer or whatever, their goal is not to just persuade you. Their goal is to make you feel it. See what I'm saying? And they do a pretty good job of it. And so what I think happens often is we respond to somebody who's got really strong feelings by attempting to give them different information. And so what they do is what my toddler child does when I give her food she doesn't like. Right? And instead, I think the question that we ought to be asking is like, tell me how you feel. Like, why do you feel the way you feel? And I think when you can get to somebody on the level of emotion, most emotions tend to be somewhere between fear, anger, hope. And I think if we can move them from fear and anger to some kind of hope, that's, I think, how to do it. But most of the time, it's allowing them to unpack what they're feeling. And then from there say, okay, I see how you could feel that way. I'm wondering what you think we ought to do about it. And get them to talk it out themselves. And usually what happens when they talk it out themselves, you're like, okay, and you're just like kind of be like, okay, that's a point you made, that's a point you made, that's a point you made. And then you give it back to them, they're like, actually, no, that doesn't make as much sense as I thought it did. They won't tell you that. But in their minds, they'll be like, And what you need to kind of do is get them to say, okay, how can I find something different? See what I mean? And so I think that you're right that part of this is exposure to different information sets. It is. But more than exposure, it's like soaking in different emotional environments that are decorated by different information sets. See what I mean? And I think the more we can start asking people questions about their emotional state and why they're feeling what they're feeling and let them unpack it, the more open they'll be to saying, okay, that person heard me, like truly heard me. Kind of like that example with the doctor, which is that like, okay, this person understands I'm in a lot of pain. right? And they're not just trying to like, mess with my gunshot wound, right? But like, I'm in a lot of pain, and they took the time to acknowledge that, and then from there say, okay, here's some different pieces. Last point, nobody ever wins an argument. So I'm like, and I wish I next time I hang out with my wife, just remind me that nobody ever wins an argument. But it's true. If you're arguing with somebody, by definition, you are putting them in a space where they're less interested in hearing your side of the story. And so the way you actually win an argument is to step out of it and offer somebody something that they're going to have to think about when you're gone. And then what's going to happen to you is this, if you're successful. They'll come back to you and start arguing your point to you. That's when you know you won. And that's when you actually give them the victory of being like, that's brilliant. That's genius. I can't believe. Yeah, thank you. But we want to win an argument where it's an engagement between two sides of a set of information. And what we want is this. You know what? You're right. I see clearly because you have changed my mind. You are brilliant, and I'm an idiot. And I thank you for your intervention on my life. And it never works that way, right? So I think if we like leave that aside, ask somebody about why they're feeling the way they're feeling, and then engage them with a piece of information that they'll have to ruminate on moving forward, what you want them to do is go look up that thing on their own, right? Because now it's not just the information they're exposed to when they're angry and want to show you you're wrong. It's information that they sought out for themselves, which means that they'll value, which means that they'll think about, which means that at some point they'll come and argue to you like you never heard it before, right? And that's when you give them that, you step back, and then you make one of those Cheshire Cat grins to yourself. but I really appreciate the point. And I think we just need to understand just how social media works. Because I think a lot of us think that it's like, we think that it is a fair information space, and it's just not. And that's the worry that I really have for all of us, frankly. So appreciate the question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So, my mic on? Yes, thank you. If that wasn't worth your price of admission right there for registration, I think Dr. El Sayed's message today, super critical. We're all been given an opportunity to work on the challenges, the opportunities that we talked about today. And, we have that unique opportunity to build an opportunity environment in our own communities. Human flourishing is a choice, and we can help make that positive choice. Be transparent and consistent in our messaging, choose high standards, and follow through to build on the trust within our community. Those are all messages we can take home and build on as we go back to our communities. Thank you again, Doctor. We appreciate you being here today. I also want to say, again, a special shout out and thanks to PGE for being their sponsor today. After this keynote, we do have a reception. It'll be out by where you come into the conference center. We invite you to join us. Please download your LOC app if you haven't already, and rate each of the sessions that you've attended. We want feedback so that we can bring you more and better content each year. And in this welcome reception, it's an opportunity to visit with your fellow officials, enjoy some appetizers and beverages, and visit the representatives from our sponsors this year, who are Northwest Natural, HomeServe, Aetna, Oric, and Harrington and Sutcliffe. You will actually be given raffle tickets at the reception, and we'll be doing some raffle giveaways, but you do have to be present to win. You do have to wear your badge to get into the event, so please wear your badge. Afterwards, we'd encourage you to enjoy beautiful downtown Bend, shop at their restaurants, leave some of your money here for them, thank them for hosting. And then tonight, we have a caucus mixer over at the hotel, the Riverfront Lodge, in the Deschutes room, and it starts at 8:30. The Deschutes room is the closest part of the building to the convention center, And that's being hosted by the People of Color Caucus and the Women's Caucus. Finally, looking ahead to tomorrow, we'll get things underway at 7 a.m. with breakfast and the trade show, followed by our small, medium, and large city networking sessions at 8 a.m. 9:15, we'll have our first set of tours and breakout sessions. And tomorrow evening, we hope you'll be able to join us for the awards dinner at 6 p.m. That will be immediately followed by the president's reception. It's going to be a full day ahead and a busy conference. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon in this welcome reception, and enjoy the rest of your conference.